Today we're going to take a look at the work of artist Charles Daubigny. He was a French painter in the Barbizon school, and we're going to see why he was a big influence on the French Impressionists. And when I was in art school in Chicago back in the late 1970s, I would go to the Art Institute a lot, the museum part of it, and they had a lot of paintings by Charles Daubigny. Also a lot of paintings by Alfred Sisley. And so I really liked their work a lot and would study their work. This is one of them. It's at the Art Institute. And I'm assuming late evening, could be early morning, but I'm assuming late evening. This image is a little dark. I remember more light in the shadows, but a really stunning painting. Learned a lot from looking at his work. He was my first painter that I really got to know, because there's just a lot of his work there at the museum, as well as Alfred Sisley. But Charles Daubigny was born in 1817 and died in 1878. He's part of the Barbizon School of Painting. In 1843, he started painting outside, which really changed his work. And you could see when you look at his originals how loose they are. Brushwork is very loose. And while overall they're very dark canvases, there's a lot of light and atmosphere in them. And he did meet Camille Corot, 1852, and they started painting together. And that's also had a big effect on his work. And then later, he met Monet in England, and they painted together in England and in the Netherlands. And he had an effect on his work as well as Cézanne. So I think the French Impressionists learned a lot from looking at his work. This one's a little bit more airier, more atmosphere. But while there's not a lot of color in the shadows, it's more of a low-key. All his paintings are definitely more low-key, but he was the first, I think, to really see more light and atmosphere, because he painted outside along with Corot. But you can tell he had black on his palette and used that a lot in the darks, just to darken the greens or the boat or the darks in the water. But he was able to simplify more because he's outside, and was able to be more spontaneous, more impressionistic, and his work shows it. And a lot of his work shows it also color-wise, not so much these. It's more in the style of Corot. But you can tell the atmosphere, a little bit more color in the shadows, and just a really nice sense of color as far as color harmony goes. Still using black probably to harmonize all his colors, but just a great sense of light and drawing as well. He really drew well. Looking at some of his sketches from his sketchbooks that are online, you can really tell that he just sees really well. Again, very atmospheric, very loose. The brushwork is really nice. Starting with the darks, very thin paint, and then gradually building up the lights so that they're thicker, and at the end hitting lights and highlights a lot thicker, so you get that thick and thin contrast. It's a real nice one. Very impressionistic. You can see how this would influence the Impressionists. Very nice. Great job on these trees. A lot of small brush strokes, but very loose, and his small brush strokes don't take away from the large shapes or masses. Usually when artists use tiny brush strokes, it breaks up the painting, the big shapes, too much, and they kind of fall apart. But here, even though he's using smaller brush strokes, the big shapes really hold together. So the design is a lot stronger. I was able to find a lot of large images of his work, which is sometimes hard to do, but you can see it a lot better. A lot of nice subtle variations in the greens. Again, I think this photograph might be a bit too dark in the shadows, but did do glazing, which isn't very impressionistic. Probably this might be more of a studio painting. But my guess is this is more of an outdoor painting. And a lot of these paintings that don't have the glazing, that are more spontaneous, were done outside. This is a beautiful painting here. It's like a 12 by 18, not really big. Maybe done outside, don't know. But just a real nice variation of the greens in there. And a lot less black. I'm sure there's some black in here, but not as much in all the big dark areas. Relying more on color and maybe complementary color to create the grays and darks. The nice soft edges, loose brushwork, and the drawing is just really good. And the values. Values are what makes the painting work, which makes the color work. This is an etching by him. He did etchings. He also had a houseboat that he painted from. And the title of this has something to do with Daubigny painting from his houseboat. So I guess that's him painting in his houseboat. That would be ideal to have a houseboat. Again, an outdoor sketch, very loose, just capturing what the light's doing. Strong color, some black still. Very, very nice. Also probably an outdoor painting. Again, just thinking because of the bigger, more simple shapes, looser brushwork, again, capturing the light. Big subject in the landscape for the Barbizon School was late evening, early morning, where the sun's just setting or just rising. So they're capturing that light, the dark trees, the really light sky and reflections in the water. Painted trees very well. Again, this one more airy, more atmospheric. You can zoom in a bit more because it's a large file. You can see kind of the nice color variations of green. A lot of variation on the hillside back there. And really good values. Looks like a little bit of glazing or scumbling when it was dry. So I don't know, maybe this was studio, but hard to say. Either way, really works well. Again, late evening, a lot of strong contrast. There we go. I'm adjusting the shadows, and the minute I do that, you see a lot more color in these shadows here. So really nice. There's a figure and a cow there, which did not see when it was so dark. Color's very harmonious, and I like the warm light sky against the darker trees. Again, the black and the shadows on the boat. Strong contrast and drawing, probably an outdoor painting. This was a larger one. There's a photograph of a figure standing next to it. So it was a pretty large painting, but I zoom in and there's another totally different painting right there. You can see a little bit of the brushwork, softening edges, maybe some glazing of the trees over the background. But the thicker lights in the background really stand out against the darks. Really nice. You can zoom in on these bigger files and kind of see and the thick lights on there with some dry brush. Just kind of skipping over the darks. But more of a studio painting. Is very large. Now this is Charles painting in the studio. Very formal portrait. And one hand colored probably, because they did not have colored photography back in the 1860s and 70s. Very impressionistic here, real strong color. Again, kind of dark in the shadows. A lot of strong contrast of warm and cool and dark and light. Nice loose brushwork. And he's able to see things in a more simple manner, very simple shapes. When you do that, you can concentrate more on getting the contrast, value contrast, and color temperature contrast between those big shapes. But if you break the painting up too much into smaller little details, it's hard to get that contrast. It's real nice warm skies, I'm guessing towards the evening, late afternoon, and the sunlight just hits a couple of spots on the boat. My guess is an outdoor painting because of the looseness. maybe some glazing back in the studio. Great job on that boat. Just little information as possible. Less is more in painting. Another one here, late afternoon. Nice contrast, warm and cool and dark and light. Also, I guess, an outdoor scene, but a lot more variation of green than a lot of the Barbizon school painters and the painters before that, where there was more classical landscape, where shadows were just black and brown, and they focused on lights without much temperature. And last one here, in great contrast, the kind of sun hitting these houses. Nice subtle color changes within the greens. And these are big enough we can zoom in and kind of look at the brush work a little bit. Sometimes figures in these landscapes just look like an afterthought. There's a hat sitting on the shoulders there. But he's a landscape painter, not a figure painter. So that figure there is very nice. You can see how he builds up the lights, keeping the darks fairly thin. But even the lighter darks he builds up. But in the light areas, it's thicker paint and kind of dry brushing it over the shadows. Nice job on the clouds in here. Well, that was Charles Daubigny. Good artist to study because there's a lot of large files of his work online. You can kind of zoom in and see a little bit about what he's thinking. But he was a good influence on the French Impressionists.